Тема развития внутреннего и въездного туризма не нова, но в последнее время эта тема становится особенно актуальной. Важно учитывать, что туристам интересно не просто отдыхать, но в первую очередь обогащаться духовно, расширять кругозор, знакомиться с историей и архитектурой новых мест. В этой связи одним из ключевых драйверов развития регионов и привлечения туристического потока могут стать бывшие дворянские поместья, яркие образцы русской усадебной культуры. В едином государственном реестре объектов культурного наследия народов России зарегистрировано более 2500 усадеб. Грамотно вовлеченные в хозяйственный оборот, объекты усадебного наследия могут также послужить подъему экономики вокруг себя. Какие программы предлагают власти, чтобы пристроить усадьбы в хорошие руки? С какими сложностями сталкиваются реставраторы и собственники при интеграции старинных усадеб в современную жизнь? Примеры лучших кейсов и многое другое на сессии «Исторические усадьбы как драйвер развития российских регионов».
Good day to you, dear friends. I'm glad that we're all here. This forum will last for a few days. We're not speaking about the months of projecting by the students, and I'm here as the host of the round table, and started other universities a couple of years ago. We started Marhi, where there were architects of mixed professions, and there were different topics like industrial buildings, like Crystal Factory, Pravda. And tomorrow we'll have the international part of the projects from other cities as well, and we're glad to welcome colleagues not only from Moscow and regions, but from Krasnoyarsk as well. So I suggest that we begin from a very interesting example, restoration of the whole quarter of city mansions in Krasnoyarsk. And the heritage was the mansion in the city, but it actually was in the suburbs. Then the city grew and accumulated it, and in some places there were just types of this mansion in Krasnoyarsk. I even passed by this quarter, but I was in a hurry, that's why I didn't get too deep into details, so let us switch to the presentation. Hello, dear participants of the round table. First of all, I'd like to thank for participation and for invitations for such an event, and it's especially nice that it's being held in the Year of Cultural Heritage of Peoples of Russia. And now we'll be speaking about the houses, the mansions, and recently the President of Russia has approved a list of orders to Russian government for country estates restoration. And we have the second largest region of Russia. We are represented both in the southern territories and in the north, and our heritage is various. We were speaking a lot about preservation of historical heritage and development of territories, and we are actively operating in our practice in this dimension. One of the successful examples here is a project of historical court. That's the block. There's 6 objects constructed out of timber, and you saw how they looked before they were restored and represented and became the site for the city and cultural heritage for the city. To the left you can see these objects. These were the houses where people were not living. It was a depressed territory with no perspectives for development. There was a huge analysis performed, territorial analysis, land analysis, and this territory had to be approached in a complex manner, and there was a work on looking for investors, and I will briefly tell you about the essence of the project. And you know that one of the strategic goals is attracting investment to these objects. So this project is almost completely investment projects, and budget was used in a very minor way. After the looking for investor, we were thinking about how to implement this model. So the limited liability company was performed. The shareholders were found for these objects, and they were leased with the possibility to be purchased after the restoration works. And a very important mission of historical quarters, a professional player of this market, and experts work there. They know how to work with the population. They fully follow these projects. After this company was created, this shareholders company, as this project was implemented by the method of reassembling, so it's a complex one, and we had to work with experts to prove the correctness of this project and for this project to be trusted. After the project works, production works were performed, and this experience is presented now as a successful project. The next slide is about the legal model. I will not go into details here. I said it briefly. We'll share the presentation if it's of interest to you, for you. And we will share our mechanisms with colleagues here. I wanted to show a little bit what was previously, to see the contrast, how did they look like, and how they look like now. You can also see the interiors, the informations, the information plates which have QR codes and which regulate the sphere. What was the important effect after implementing this project? In it, it's a driver for the territory development. After that, after reconsideration of these projects, the nearby territory also was reconsidered. The territory of the Central Park, which is nearby, is also a site for the city, and now is being actively transformed, and the investor is the same investor who was financing the in the objects. That's Rusal company. Also, the territory of cultural heritage on the other side was reconsidered. We reconsidered that and gave it a status of site, and now we implement the second line of restoration of the object and its integration in today's environment. What are the other senses? Obviously, it became a driver for internal tourism and the creative industries which are actively developing. First of all, new excursion routes appeared. That was a promenade along the for the mansions. And it ends in this historic block, and the demand is high. And the cinema is being produced, and we hope this book, which was made together with the investor, with Rusal, we wanted to transfer it to the fund of youth heritage. You had a good previous slide with some children, maps or something. There was the public. How did the public influence that? Or you had to agree with them to avoid conflicts? working with the public, if we speak after the mistrust phase, we focused on reconsidering the heritage and its role as a brand of territory, and in this situation we proved that these projects will not be demolished and will be preserved, and we're glad that we show a quality product with genuinity of these products and all the methods of restoration. And after that, we received even more trust. This district has been developed, and we transfer a successful experience within the region. Shares were given to the regional property, and the objects all over the region are reconsidered, these very mansions, and working not with a major investment, but also good results when they were restored and integrated in contemporary environment. I understand how important it is to work with the public, and we show the openness of the project. We were sharing it, involving the media for people to trust the process. And if I may, I'll give the floor to my colleague. We came together to tell in detail certain moments on the historical quarter, on the historical district. Good day to you. The object near this historical district of the same type. Here, the investor was a person who wants to make a 2 or 3 star hotel here. This object was launched this year, and there's investor plans. Here, every room will be full of history. There will be newspapers 100 years old, and the tourists will be interested to read these old newspapers or the news and the announcements. And other elements will be with the historical subtext. Speaking about details, going back to the historical object as a project of Rusal, each basement is technical, and it allows the functionality of the complex to make it really very technological. Here is the system of ventilation and cooling of the air. Everything is done using contemporary equipment. The heating is going from the municipal network, and cooling of the second and other floors, distribution of this air with this system of valves is happening, so you can feel absolutely comfortable. And also historic elements, genuinity is our main rule of material, of the idea of the author is the main thing, our 4 main ideas. And in this cultural objects, we have these holes in the walls which allowed it to introduce the richness of the time into the interiors. The contemporary alpine windows, they were restored, and part of them was bought in antique shops, and they were restored. And those which were historically preserved, they were restored there. Big attention was paid to the ovens, the doors which were restored as well. Local experts restore these elements. And a special attention should be paid to the wallpaper. In St. Petersburg, there is a company which produces wallpaper with the prints of that time most close by the colors, and they are created using old technology, using the print modes of the 20th century, when layer after layer it was applied, the paint was applied, and the edges of each of the papers is painted handmade manner, in a handmade manner, and it is transferred from generation into generation. And concluding our report, I would like to say that the greatest use you can extract from your life is to spend your life for a deed which will live longer than us. Colleagues, you showed good examples of restoration of the heating and other aspects. So maybe somebody was trained for some new professions, for restorations. Did it create any jobs in the region? It's actually a very important problem for the region. We want to create a school of restoration. It was supported not only by government of our region, but also the Siberian Federal University, based on which a big complex is planned to be created, starting from the basic education for college education and ending up with the restoration as the higher education. Implementing this project, we heard many times that not always you can find mass experts who know how to do some restoration methodology, to use some methodology. So Rusal was inviting experts from all over Russia. That's why we realized even better that we need to launch the high school of restoration based on the Siberian University. On the international phase, tomorrow there will be the outcomes of it. And one of the projects was these high schools in one of those buildings. In the center of our city, we have an appropriate building, a historic object. It initially was a school, and our colleagues from the Institute represent this project of transferring it and adjusting it. We will speak more precisely on the 3rd of December, and I hope we have good future in restoration. We invite young experts to Siberia. Thank you. Maybe some colleagues have any things to add. Colleagues, please tell me, what were the legal foundation to transfer these objects for the shareholders? That was privatization. It can be done in different ways. It passed all the phases. Initially they were the shareholders privatized it. They have 100% of shares, and according to the law of Krasnodar region, they included and the emission of extra shares is performed, and the object is transferred to the private property. This is one of the objects of privatizing it. So it's a direct purchase. It was a direct purchase, right? Or it was an auction? What was the mechanism of transition? The objects are estimated, evaluated, and the objects are transferred by the law. So privatization is going through trades, through auction. Was there an auction? Auction is one of the ways We can do it via trading or introducing it into the founding capital. And one of the founders is the government of the region. Now it's the regional level. So, as the government was one of the members of the joint stock company, so it introduced this property in the company. That's actually what I wanted to specify. Thank you. And as for the book, you have a wonderful book which you published on your own by Rusal in Krasnoyarsk, or you did it in Moscow? And where is the main number of books? It was spread among the library and the libraries to the maximum. So it's for Krasnoyarsk, right? For the locals. It's not a corporate kind of edited book. It's for people, yes, and probably we'll sell it. But now we're doing it free of charge. There's a big number of books for this object, for the complex of historical district. And how do you share it? There is a historical part with all the historical references, with working of the object as it is, and the second one is the mechanism of restoration, for it to be as a manual, basically. Thank you. All right, friends, maybe you have some questions from the audience? Because we are basically talking between ourselves. There is a mic, by the way, so you can come there and ask your question.
Alexander Spivak.
And I would like to ask the following. At the previous round table, the speaker asked how it can bring revenue, bring profit. So Rusal, that implemented it all within the domestic law, they understand that it is mostly charity, like, for example, VTB activities in Zotov and so on. So my question is about adapting these buildings in the historical quarter. So what will there be now? What will there be in 5 years? So what do you see the prospects of adapting these buildings, and do you need any return on the investment? So if we talk about the historical quarter project, first, the adaptability was for business and society. And now we can see that there is a certain reconsideration. So it is going to turn into some cultural space, and it is being used like that now. There are some informative lectures that are held there. Furthermore, there is a hotel, a restaurant there. So the task is going to be like that. And then the investor would assess the return and the openness of this space at all. And it is clear that the main revenue comes from the hotel. But you have touched upon the topic of maintenance, and we are actually focusing that at this stage when we start working with sites, with the owners, because we understand that different sites are in different ownership. And it's critical to understand that, because, for example, now we are restoring whole cities, and we assess who will operate and maintain this site afterwards, because it is important to instill this life and find the budget for that. But what's then? For example, now there is a restoration of the historical part of Minosinsk, and it is clear that it will be funded by the state budget. And we also assessed Yeniseisk, and there are a lot of churches there, and they will not always function in this In this meaning, very often they will act as museums, and we have come up with a museum reserve that is in charge of that. And we have the reverse story, where the church came as a driver for the development of the whole territory. So that is not about the function of the site, but still, I would like to show you an example when a decision was made to restore a church in a small residential area, in a small settlement with 100 people population, and there then they started developing the territory, and there is an important attraction point in the Krasnoyarsk region. So there are a lot of perspectives here, and it's really good that this topic is discussed now. And sometimes it is not a mansion, but a church that can drive the development of the whole territory, and that is really brilliant. Thank you. Do we have any more comments from the audience? Okay, thank you very much, Elena and Alisa from Krasnoyarsk, and we need to have Grigory Melametov, head of Cultural Heritage Sites Management from Nizhny Novgorod region, joining us online. So, do we receive the signal? I don't think that we have him connected online. So while two of our colleagues are connecting, let's move on. And we have another PowerPoint of Dmitry Oynas. He's head of projects of autonomous not-for-profit organization Kolomensky Posad and many others. And Dmitry is well known in many difficult points that we can discuss, and these examples are truly important for us. So, Dmitry, the floor is yours. Thank you. I did not know that we were supposed to talk about urban mansions. That's why I focus mainly mansions that are outside cities. So I can actually give you a lot of cases on cities as well. And I believe that Grigory Melamet is going to share some information about the Nizhny Novgorod project. That was a joint project of ours, and it dealt with several quarters, several districts of the city. But as again, I did not know that we were supposed to talk about cities, I focused my presentation on the areas outside cities, on rural mansions. So that is a picture from my computer screen that shows the density of mansions in 3 regions, that is Yaroslav, Kostroma and Ivanovo regions. And that is only those that I know, that those that I have identified and studied. But it is clear that there is a huge number of sites of different level of conservation. But this density really makes these sites critical resources, for example, in terms of a new approach in the settlement system. As now all the formats are breaking down, including the format of rural settlements, and we keep discussing the matter of villages that die out. So the question arises, how are we going to develop these villages and these rural areas? And this question is still open. And the new formats of rural settlements are being devised right in front of us. And that is actually one of the main resources in terms of the density, again, and in terms of the synergy and opportunities that it opens up, and that deals with a lot of spheres of economy and culture and administration. And it enables us to bring back certain activity to these rural areas that would provoke or invoke activity around them. Therefore, this mesh can cover at least all European part of Russia, and if we find the correct approaches to this resource even further on. Here we can see my statistics that I studied personally, and here we talk about over 6,000 manor complexes, manor and mansion complexes, and it is clear that this context is constantly changing, but even now that I from time to time go to these complexes and study them, the percentage ratio is close to the one that I indicate on the slide. So if you can see, 7% accounts for the totally lost sites. So there is nothing there at all. There is a plowed up territory, either built up or just grown over with various bushes and trees and so on. And that is something that does not let us work with it at all. All the other positions are something that we have a chance in. And it's not in vain that I'm saying all that, because I know some sites with a really horrendous state, but we managed to launch pretty working models there. So manor, mansion resources for territory development and different administrative and economic practices, development of new rural areas beyond Moscow, the Moscow Ring Road, are really serious, and even more serious than in Moscow. And I would like to share some manor and mansion cases that I have dealt with, just to show you different formats of their launch and use. So that is a manor in the Vologda region, Khvalevskoye manor. It is privately owned, but at the same time it is a pretty active cultural center for locals. That is a Vologda remote rural area on the border of Vologda, the Novgorod regions, and it is pretty hard to get there. And today the manor is a key site for the local cultural and economic activity, and the people who bought this manor actually have it as their family heritage that they managed to return to themselves. So that is like restoring historical fairness, and they have revolutionized these facilities. They have brought it back to its functions, historical functions. And we used to say that it is impossible to revolutionize manners, but it is possible, and a lot of sites of this kind have proven them. And in that sense, we are different from the European approach to sites of this kind, because we do not have a practice of living, residing in these manors. we have been switched off the continuity process for 100 years. Continuity, I mean, again, in residing and living, and that is the main obstacle in reviving this heritage. We just can't, we do not know how to live there, and that is the main issue that we need to overcome. And the people that now have started working on these sites, that have engaged in this work, are pioneers that are laying this path to others. So they are walking through this practically, making mistakes and correcting them. Another example that breaks another stereotype that only very rich people can own manors. Here you can see a simple farmer who owns a manor, and he grows potato and crops there, and he has animals. And as this manor used to belong to Pushkin's relatives, now different Pushkin's festivals are held there, and there are a lot of projects connected with Pushkin there. But at the same time, there is this farmery that develops within classical manor traditions. Here you can see Voronina Manor in Yaroslavl region. This manor has also gone back to the Leontievs Count, and now Sergei Alexandrovich Leontiev, the direct offspring of the previous owners, owns this manor, and his grandmother was born here. In the Soviet times, there was a Druzhba pioneer kids summer camp, and the manor was then purchased as the inventory and the property of this summer camp. And we had to think what to do with it. We were looking for the topic and the foundation, I mean the contents foundation that would take this site to the focus of everybody's attention. And now you can go and stay there for some time, and the key topic that is evolving and attracting everyone actively, that is Russian hound dogs that traditionally and historically have been bred in the Leontiev family, and there were races arranged, so that has come back to this original soil. And that is one of my European projects, that is Bretel Castle. That is a French rural area. Of course, no one will be surprised with the castles in France because they are present in every village, like our manors in Russia. But we had to do something with it, and it was abandoned, and Brito returned to it not long ago, and they came to see the ruins, and the present owner has put it to order to its present condition. And once, when we were spending an evening together with him, he said that yes, it is going on pretty well, but I would like to get a good economy here. And we started looking into their family archives to see some correspondence that proved that Charles Perrault was a guest to this castle, and he started writing his famous fairy tale about the pass in the boots, so you can understand pretty well what the castle became a prototype of. So now it is the second castle in visitorship in France now, and it is visited by families with children. And that is the only city or urban manor that I have included into my presentation. That is a manor in Rostov, Veliki, and the top picture shows the building as it used to be. So there was simply the envelope. It was 2004, and bearing in mind that Rostov is one of the cities of the Golden Ring, still on inertia we visit the cities of the Golden Ring, so there was some flow there, but infrastructure was practically non-existent. So a hotel was a logical solution to this site. Therefore, we have come up with an interior hotel. So you can go to stay in the interiors of this pretty small hotel, and it has 24 rooms there. And then time passed, and a lot of competitors turned up to this hotel in the territory, and now there are a lot of rooms to stay in the city. So the demand of this hotel has gone down. That is why we started thinking what to do further on and how to update this site to reach the necessary economic level. So therefore we looked at this local heritage, and now the infrastructure of the hotel envelops practically a whole district, a whole quarter, and there are arts and crafts connected with trunks and candles and gingerbread here, the so-called Rostov Pryanitsa. That is the main essential project of this complex. That is an unusual gingerbread because it is huge, and it's practically of the size of a chair, and there is a setting of different figures, people, trees, buildings, and bridegrooms used to give this gingerbread to their brides, to their fiancés, and at the bridal shower they used to eat it up. And elderly people were not supposed to eat gingerbread, and only their children and grandchildren were supposed to eat it, and thanks to them it existed. So the topic of the family with the gingerbread as the focal ritual point in the family that accompanies people in their lives and brings them to their main purpose in life, to continue their inheritance, to give birth to children, is the focus of this project. That is another project, Astashova village in Kostroma region. The site was also difficult because the village was totally died out, and within 30 kilometers around it there were around 3 people living there, and there were no roads but just tracks to carry wood. So practically it was a taiga, and it is around 200 something kilometers away from the regional center. And 20 meters away from this building there was a log with a live bear. And now that is practically very active place, one of the centers for tourism and culture in Kostroma region, and it is one of the top attractions in the territory. And the main topic that generates interest and shapes a range of products and services is the daily life and the lifestyle of locals. That is how people used to live here, what their daily routine used to be. It was not a value to them, but for us now that is a true value, because there is salt of Thursday and these mushrooms and these shirts that ladies used to sew to their husbands from their own dresses are now used by hipsters, Moscow hipsters, and that is how economy of these kinds of sites is formed. There is another European project, Valmer Castle. Its location is pretty unusual because it is one of the key tourist routes of France that is called the Loire Castles, and that is the largest national project of France. But still, it is among a huge number of kings' castles, and it cannot compete with them. And therefore, this whole stream of tourists was just passing by, because people didn't want to distract themselves with some minor castles. Therefore, the task was to take a tributary from that huge stream of tourists towards this castle. And the key idea that laid the foundation of the economy for this site was that we suddenly saw that this classical French castle with a regular park has the focal position belonging to a kitchen garden. So it was like a regular kitchen garden that was, so to say, the focal point, the foreground, and we decided to restore it. And we didn't want to restore the kitchen yard with the present current vegetables, but we had to restore the old French vegetables, and it turned out that Moscow Timiryaziev Institute had those species and varieties, and now they are grown there, and they are the foundation of all products and services there. They are cooked at restaurants, and they are pickled, they are sold as souvenirs. Artists turn them into various forms, and that actually creates a whole range of various opportunities. Here is another project that I believe many of you are familiar with in different formats, and this project is connected with the manor of Andrei Bolotov Dvoryanino. And at these Count's lands, there is a huge farmers' hub with over 200 farmers, farmlands, and the key ideology of this project is the lifestyle of Andrei Bolotov, his philosophy and his idea of how you should maintain your life. And he is a unique person and a universal, so to say, person, and he is one of the most serious agricultural worker of the 17th century. He is a writer, and he is an author of the first Russian pomology, and he gathered together all varieties of Russian apples and came up with this pomology, and he was the first in the world, apart from Indians, who started cooking potato and started teaching that to people around. The French people say that they were the first, but Andrei Bolotov did it 30 years before them. And that is this complex with Bolotov Dacha, Bolotov Derevnya grew around it. So you can go there and rent a house and live this life in pretty comfortable conditions and learn the heritage of this site. And farmers are united by this one idea, one land, and there are different co-working restaurants and farmers market, and all together it creates the economy of this place. And here is a model that we applied. This matrix shows us this model and all the areas that Andrei Bolotov was a proponent of in his life. The approaches, the themes and the symbols connected with him lay the foundation of industrial chains that set this economic model.
Each topic has whole list of services which by interaction create the economic network and sustainability and gives an opportunity to support the level of quality which is required for our guests. Basically that's it. Thank you. Thank you, Dmitry Borisovich. We perfectly understand it's only the top of a huge iceberg. Nevertheless, it's really inspiring, and the relation with the landscape and the land which you showed. We're looking at quite often from the perspective of architecture or participation of architects and artifacts. And you showed that it's important and interesting to a whole list of people. Maybe colleagues have something to add. I just wanted to specify a bit to make clear one thing. Did all the cases that you enlisted, the individuals were the initiators, or maybe the government assisted? Who was the initiator of that? As for the initiatives, there is neither one public project, it's all private. I'd rather say that now, in the last 5 years, the state started to look for real cooperation tools to cooperate with the private initiatives, and we contribute to it from our side, within the framework of the activity of our organization and our community. And now the schemes of these partnerships are being elaborated, regardless the fact that we have law for that, but of the PPP, it is not for that. It's not tuned properly for that. So it's a creation of precedent every time to find the most convenient way of cooperation, not to be punished after all. But public authorities have, the public bodies have quite a big number of limitations, and performing the economic activity and the regulations which would give us freedom to do so almost not in place. They're only being elaborated. That's why I had this question about the legal basis, because the project which we are modeling in the Nizhny Novgorod is done from the scratch. We are basically inventing a new format. Maybe Grigory can tell it in more details, as well as in Ryazan. We are trying to find these models in Commission, there is a number of projects where this cooperation is now being elaborated. And obviously, it would be curious to take a look at your project, though I understand the presence of Rusal in your joint stock company. That's a principal position from the provision of investment. Among the projects which I showed you, there is not the one such big company. And on one hand, it gives certain difficulties in looking for investment. On the other hand, it does not limit in decision-making process. In this sense, the Rusal company is considering your objects as for corporate use. I think it's very logical, because in order to, by the way, how many objects do you have there? As for the historic district, this was 6 objects, but there were more of them. That's great, but even to try to launch, to bring back life to 6 projects, that's serious. Thank you. Well, the outcome is the principle of Anna Karenina, but on the contrary, of the cities and the mansions outside the cities, they are unhappy in a single manner. Wherever you come, the problems will be the same. Problems with borders, protective documents, absence of money. If there is no understanding where to run and where to go and whom to call. Like all unhappy families are unhappy in a different manner, and the happy one is happy in a single way. And the decision will be taken from local conditions, the landscape, the people. If there are no such crazy people, in the good sense of this word, because resources is good sometimes if it's a big company, but they have their own interests. Unfortunately, we know many examples when the state-owned company demolished everything they wanted and nothing was possible to do. The very train stations, the mansions, and so on and so forth. So looking for a single big investor, it might be dangerous. But happily there is a good example. But those companies who became well known, like the Russian railroads, when they restored good railway stations. Grigory says that he is not ready. Grigory Viktorovich unfortunately fails to connect. There is a problem, unfortunately, but it would be the most likely.
Коллеги, добрый день, меня слышно, видно?
So we have Evgeny Gorbarunsky, the professor of landscape architecture of the Academy of Construction and Architecture. Dear colleagues, can you hear me? Yes, we can. Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I'd like to express gratitude for giving an opportunity to participate in such a representative and respected event. And in many years of our practice, it's really good. And thank you for very interesting reports, which were informative and practical. The topic of my report is about now I'll try to show the screen.
подключить экран. Видно экран?
Can you see my screen?
Да.
Yes.
Конечно, соответствует той теме,
Of course, it is about the topic
сейчас мы участвуем
we're
в
discussing now.
рассмотрении. На примере Донецкой Народной Республики,
On the example of
как
Donetsk
частью
People's Republic of Donetsk,
российских регионов
as
в
part of
последнее
Russian
время.
regions,
И те же проблемы, которые
from
сегодня
recent time, and those problems we discussed
И спасибо еще
are also
за
in place.
возможность вот
And
эту
thank you
тему,
once more for
связанную
an
с усадьбами,
opportunity for this topic with
прикоснуться к ней,
inventions
потому что эта
to
тема,
refer
возможно,
to
не так
it.
актуальна в нашем регионе по сравнению
This topic is not
с
as relevant
тематикой других объектов, реконструкции,
in our
реставрации.
region comparing to other objects for restoration.
Республики,
And the
как
territory
видно
of the
здесь
Republic, as you can
карты,
see
это
here,
бывшая Донецкая область. И на
former
сегодняшний день
Donetsk Oblast.
проблема состоит в том, что
Now
она
the
лишь
problem is that
частично
it is only
сейчас
partly
вот как бы
now
в правах так сказать, владения и рассмотрения, потому что лишь
the ownership
частично
rights,
мы находимся
the
на
consideration rights.
территории,
Partly we are in the territory
которая
of
была
which
раньше рассматривалась как
previously
Донецкая область,
was
и сейчас это
perceived as
входит под
Donetsk region,
границы Донецкой Народной Республики.
and
Тут
now
много
is within the borders
парадоксов,
of the
но
Donetsk
тем не менее нужно
People's
начать с того,
Republic.
что с 2001 года на территории
Starting from
Донецкого региона
2001 in the
находится
territory of
8
region,
исторических городов было принято. Это и Славянск, и
there is a number
Востока,
of historic
Артемовск,
cities,
Часовьяр, Макеевка,
cities,
Донецк,
Makiev,
Мариуполь.
Artyomovsk,
И
Donetsk,
на сегодняшний
Mariupol,
день, вот, в
etc.
отличие
And
от
today,
тех регионов,
contrary
которые
to those
участвуют в
regions which
сегодняшнем рассмотрении,
participate
у нас катастрофическая
in
проблема с
today's
кадрами.
resistance, we have
Фактически вот
terrific
история
problem with the
освоения культурного
personnel.
наследия,
The
она
history
не так
of the cultural heritage
длинна.
is
И,
not that
как
old,
правило, вот вся проблема,
and the
которая
problem is
возникала
really
с этим, это и вопросы администрирования,
both
и
administrative
вопросы,
issues
все сложности, которые
and those
на территории
difficulties
нашего региона, это
we
и
have in the
повышенная
territory of
индустриализация,
the
урбанизация,
region, the
которая фактически
urbanization,
сметала на
the
своем пути
industrialization,
культурное
which
наследие.
was
Но, тем не
basically
менее,
wiping out the cultural
часть
heritage.
определенная
Nevertheless,
осталась,
a
и на
part of it
государственном
remained,
учете находится на сегодняшний
and
день
now
около 2 с лишним тысяч
we have
объектов
around
культурного наследия.
2+
Это и
thousands of
памятники
cultural
архитектуры,
objects,
градостроительства, это
monuments of architecture, of
памятники
town
истории,
planning,
монументальное искусство
the
и памятники
monumental art
археологии. И
and
среди них
archaeology.
определенное место занимают
And special
усадьбы.
part
Вот.
of
Причем
them
эти
is
усадьбы,
occupied by
они
mansions.
нельзя сказать, что
But
они
I cannot say that
включены в реестр государственных
they
памятников культурного
are
наследия.
introduced
Но
in the
самая
register of state
такая вот раскрученная
heritage.
тема — это с родовыми усадьбами
But
семьи
as
Бандышей,
for
которые
the mention
это
of Mandish
известная
family,
семья
a
вообще в
well-known
Российской
family
империи
in
была в
Russian
свое
Empire,
время. То есть это было связано с хозяйственной колонизацией
and
территории
they were,
Донецкого региона, когда
so
в
to say,
18 веке,
colonizing
известно, после
the region
подписания договора
after
с
signing
Турцией,
the treaty with
территории
Turkey.
начали активно
The
заселяться. Эта территория
territories began to be
Донецкого региона, она была
actively
повреждена и
settled,
активно заселялась. И уделялись земельные
and
наделы,
land plots
ранговые
were
дачи, и это, собственно, и
allocated,
дало толчок к
which
развитию
gave impetus to
усадебного
the
строительства.
development of
И
the
вот
mansion construction.
помещики Бандыши таким образом
And
получил
Bandish
Бог еще Петра I земельные наделы, основали
received these
дачи,
land plots
дачу, которая
from Peter the
находится
Great and
в
established these daches, which are now in
селе Прилесное в Славянском районе,
Брилецкая
основали в
village
1768 году.
in
Это на
Slaviansk
севере
region, which was
нашего
founded in
региона.
1768.
И усадьба
And the mansion
находится на сегодняшний день в
is
плачевном
nowadays
состоянии. Она
in a
находилась
very desperate
после
condition.
1917 года во
After
владении
1917, it was
учреждений.
owned
И
by different entities.
уже в 80-е
And in
годы
the 80s,
ею она была передана в собственность Донецкой железной
it
дороги.
was given to the
И
property
там
of
был
Donetsk Railroads.
пионерский лагерь.
There was the Pioneer Camp, which was closed in 1995, after which it was almost not used. But there is a wonderful park, a wonderful lake, and the house itself is an example of classicism. You see its current condition. It has not been restored or reconstructed. And in these conditions, in the recent years, nothing has been done in order to maintain it in more or less proper situation. Despite that, this object is considered as a possibility of inner and outer tourism, and Museum of Indigenous Architecture, which gives an opportunity or an argument to develop this house, this mansion, as a potential object of cultural heritage, combined with other objects on this territory. Another villa of Bandыши is in Kamyshevatov, in the suburbs of Kramatorsk, which has a mansion, suburban mansion, of a public activist, the descendant of Bandysh who founded it, and who founded it. And in the recent period, after 2014, after 2022, they tried to restore it. That's its initial condition, which is covered by limestone, local limestone, which is typical for the region. Here is the history of it. It was owned by different public entities, and the last one was the Donetsk Regional Administration, which included it in ecological services, part of it. There is a Museum of Nature, and a number of companies were trying to restore it. Today it led to damaging the appearance, some interiors of the rooms were decorated with some typical elements, and experts think that now it looks simply as a provincial restaurant. And Dmitry Ilovaisky, general, was awarded a paper to own this territory and founded big number of settlements in the Donetsk People's Republic, the city of Ilovaisk, and the railroad station there, and the town of Makiivka, the city of Makiivka, which is second biggest in the Donetsk region. Previously it was called Dmitrievsk. This mansion is also made in classical architecture. In the Soviet times it was a club. It was rebuilt actively for the functions of the club. With the facades in social styling, but it remained
подвал хозяйственный, который
And
тоже вот на
there
сегодняшний
is
день
also
пытаются
some technical premises
воссоздавать. Но этот
which they're
объект, он,
trying
к
to
сожалению, не
restore, but
включен в
unfortunately,
Государственный реестр памятников культурного
this
наследия.
object is
Это
not in
предстоит
the register
сделать, потому что,
of
как уже было
heritage.
сказано, что в последнее время мы очень
And
сильно
recently,
отстали в этом отношении
we
за
really
последние 8 лет
seriously fall back in
по
this
вот геополитическим
perspective.
условиям.
In the
Мемориальный
last 8 years,
музей усадьба Немировича
Memorial
Данченко в селе Несутка
Museum of
Великонравстовского
Nemirovich
района
Danchenko
ДНР. Это, по сути дела,
is
родовое
of
имение
Nemirovich
Николая
Danchenko that's
Александровича Корфа. Это
actually
известный
initially was owned by
в
Nikolai
регионе педагог и
Alexandrovich Korf.
просветитель, а, собственно, Немирович Данченко, он
And
приезжал с
Nemirovich
семьей
Danchenko came there
для
with family
на отдых, и после
for
того,
vacation.
как, соответственно, после смерти и в последнее время
And after he passed away,
удачу превратили в филиал Донецкого краеведческого
it was
музея,
turned into
и
the
на
branch
сегодняшний
of
день там
Donetsk
проводятся всевозможные
Regional Museum,
мероприятия,
which
связанные вот с
hosts a number
изучением
of
творчества
events
и репрезентацией творчества
related to
великого
representation
Ивановича
of
Немировича
the
Данченко.
creative activity of
Ну, это нельзя
Nikolai
сказать, что здесь
Danchenko.
впечатляющая архитектура, но тем не менее
It's not
для
a very
нашего
impressive
региона вообще
architecture,
характерно,
but
что
nevertheless,
объекты культурного наследия, они не являются
in the
по
region,
сравнению
the
с
cultural objects,
объектами
comparing to the objects
столичного уровня
of
или
the
уровня
level of the capital
известных
cities,
исторических мест, но тем не менее
they are
они
not that
являются очень
impressive.
важными,
Nevertheless, they are
как
important
уже имя звучит, драйверами развития
drivers of
нашего
development
региона.
of our
Есть
region.
еще ряд
There is
усадеб,
also a
которые
number of
основаны
villas and mansions which were
промышленниками,
founded
в
by
частности,
the
вот специфика это,
industrialists,
поскольку это угленосный район,
as
поэтому
it's a coal
вот в данном
production
случае в
area
городе Донецке
in
находится
Donetsk.
в Ленинском районе
In Leninski
дворянский
region,
особняк
there
рода
is
Нестеровых. Он тоже
a
в
mansion
плачевном, к
of
сожалению, состоянии,
Nesterova,
потому что ими
which is
владели,
also in a poor condition.
этой усадьбой владели различные организации советские,
Some
привели его
Soviet
в
organizations
негодность, и
were
фактически он
used to
на
own
сегодняшний день тоже
it,
заброшен.
and
И
for the
на сегодняшний
moment
день
it is abandoned.
мы рассматриваем его в качестве
So we consider it
такого
as
потенциального
a
объекта
potential
для
object
его и приведения в
to be
порядок, и,
restored
собственно, наделения его
and to give it
включения в государственный реестр.
the
Есть еще ряд
status of
объектов,
state-owned,
которые утрачены.
state
В частности,
protected.
это усадьба графа
Some of them were lost. The
Григория
mansion of
Потемкина в
Grigory
Святогорске,
Potemkin
рядом с монастырем
next to the monastery.
Святогорской лавры. К сожалению, этот
Unfortunately,
объект, он
this object
не сохранился. Здесь вот есть
was not preserved.
гравюра
Here we have
1912
an
года,
old
где
picture of
эта
1912
усадьба на
where
одном из холмов
it is shown on one of the hills.
возвышается. И, ну, если не касаться истории,
And if we do not
само
refer to
создание,
the
как
history,
эти земли были выведены из
these lands
владения
were
Святогорской лавры, это произошло
taken from the ownership of Svyatogorsk
18 века,
monastery.
и после этого
And after that,
ряд дворян получили
number of
наделы для
nobilities
развития своего
received
имущества. И вот
some
Григорий Потемкин
land
тоже
plots for
просил
development
выделить дачку
of
в
that
Сочи, и вот в этом месте, в таком священном, это
in this
место
holy
было
place.
выделено. Но, к сожалению,
Unfortunately, after
после революции
the revolution,
этот объект был тоже утрачен.
this
На
object
сегодняшний
was
день
destroyed.
до вот этих всех событий в 2005-2008 году
And up to
было
these
предпринято
events in
несколько
2008,
научно-исследовательских работ. То есть
2005,
работа проводилась в
there was
архивах,
a number of
в
scientific
Российской
works,
Федерации, в других местах. И облик был воссоздан. На
and
сегодняшний
it
день
was
разработан
restored.
подробный проект воссоздания этого облика. Ну, это
Of
в планах.
the initial
На сегодняшний день
restoration of its initial appearance is only planned.
экспозициях воссоздать,
Now
в
the
частности,
museum
вот
plans to
здесь
restore
пример
it,
воссоздания интерьера каминного зала дворца по тем гравюрам,
and the interior of the palace,
живописным работам по описаниям, которые
based on the descriptions, the
в
pictures,
наличии.
which we have in place. There are also the mentions related with the activity of John Hughes, the British entrepreneur. Unfortunately, during the urbanization and industrialization, the subject was damaged, and we plan to restore its initial appearance. These projects, unfortunately, were not implemented. But if there were not these events, which we all are aware of, probably this would have been done. In Lugansk, the People's Republic of Lugansk, many architectural researches were made in the region. It exists from 1999, and there are also such former properties, the villa of Konstantin Yuzbash, next to the cathedral in Slivano-Serbsk region, in the town of Alexandrovsk, close to Lugansk. This is also classical mansion. There was a version that this project, probably Giacomo Florenchi, was one of the designers and architects of this project, but unfortunately we cannot say it for sure. We were researching that, and this mansion was more or less functional. There was some psychoneurotic, some clinics for mental diseases. And there was a cathedral which was planned to be built, and it was actively used later. So the Scientific and Project Center exists from 1999, and lack of personnel, and the next day, for the second year, we are trying to make some professional training of people with the constructions, with the construction and cultural heritage. And for today, we develop the projects and train the personnel who could learn how to solve such types of problems.
For example, here you can see a project that is a graduate paper on coming up with John Hughes Museum House in Donetsk. And there are some other examples. As for the main issues, I would say that there are no examples of a full, complete preservation complex. Regrettably, we do not have a complete example of this kind, bearing in mind the current conditions that we are now living in. The Uspenskaya flora of the national value has lost its buildings because of the military action, and a really huge issue is that after 1991 the main argument is not enough cultural heritage value that limits the funding of the necessary conservation and preservation activities. Very often, these sites belonged to various profit organizations that replaced one another, and it was really hard to work with them. Thank you very much for your attention, and once again, thank you for inviting me to take part in this highly representative event, and I really hope for future interactions and cooperation. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Gavronsky, and to us, regrettably, the region is in many items terra incognita, and Eastern Ukraine is something that we know very little of. And I have seen a monograph of Donbass architects, and there were a lot of data there, but I hope that you would find the necessary staff, the necessary employees, and then you would be able to work on this restoration. Thank you very much for introducing to us this number of sites. Thank you. Grigory from Nizhny Novgorod informed me that he was ready to connect. Yes, good afternoon. Can you hear and see me? Yes, we can. Good afternoon, Grigory. We are happy to welcome you to our forum. Good afternoon, and first of all, thank you for inviting me to take part in this event. Sadly, I do not have slides deck on me, and I would like to just formally share the Nizhny Novgorod experience with you. I hope that it would be useful to some of you, and some of you can really take away something from it. Nizhny Novgorod celebrated its 850th anniversary, and it was impetus to a lot of sectors of the economy that didn't used to take part in the life of the city. And it also deals with cultural heritage sites restoration. And as for us, on the budget funding, we restored over 100 sites. All in all, in our city, around 200 sites have been restored. It's worth mentioning that for these goals and tasks, we tried to come up with maximally interesting tools to invest, to raise private investment into restoration. That might not be a new experience to other regions, but to us it was a really interesting, exciting case, because we restored cultural heritage sites that are high-rise buildings and blocks of flats, and that was covered by the funding of Capital Workover Fund, and the current investment that is actually the payments of the current residents are often not enough for residential restoration and for design planning. And last year we restored the first 10 blocks of flats, and we dealt with the facades, with the roofs, and with all the design documentation drafting. The experiences that we got, I'm sure, will be in high demand, because we have moved a step further, and we are now working on another 2 dozens of multi-story blocks of flats. And last year we also came up with the autonomous non-profit organization on supporting the historical environment. And I would like to highlight that it is devoted to historical environment, because an important point in engaging the sites that are not used into the economy is unraveling a story around some point of interest in them that would help them to live further on. So what this agency helps us to do, it is founded with the support of the government of Nizhny Novgorod region and the direct participation of the public organization that
Так вот,
is
данная организация, она в
called
настоящее время
Reserve
осуществляет
Quarters, and
и
this
разработку проектной
organization is
документации в отношении ряда объектов
currently
культурного
in
наследия, в том числе
charge
усадебных комплексов,
of
и привлечение
drafting
инвесторов,
the design
и
documentation,
занимается
raising
благоустройством окружающей
funds,
территории, и
attracting
занимается
investors,
событийным туризмом.
landscaping,
То есть мы
event
в данный
tourism.
момент
So
этой
currently,
организацией охватили, как мне
with
кажется,
the help of
весь
this
пул
organization, we have embraced
того,
the
что
whole
необходимо для того,
range
чтобы
of what is
вернуть к жизни
needed to
памятники.
bring these
Основное
sites
сосредоточение
back to
работы
life.
данной организации
The
в
main
настоящий момент
focus
является так
of
называемый у нас в
activities
Нижнем Новгороде
of this
расположен
organization is
квартал
the
трех святителей. То
so-called
есть это историческая
Three
территория,
Saints
которая,
quarter that we have in
такой,
Nizhny
знаете,
Novgorod.
достаточно
That is
большой
a
степени
historical
сохранила свою
territory
самобытность.
that has
Там
preserved
усадебные
its
комплексы,
unique
там
nature. There
находятся
are manor
и
complexes there
церкви,
and
и
churches.
вот все то, что организация это сейчас проводит, да,
And
оно,
everything
безусловно,
that the organization
способствует
is
для
now
того, чтобы
arranging
привлечь внимание,
helps
популяризировать
to
максимально
attract the
проблематику
attention of
сохранения
people and
памятников.
popularize
Там сейчас
the
проходят концерты, там
topic of
регулярно
monuments
проводятся
preservation.
какие-то
A lot of
программы,
concerts
в том
and
числе
various
новогодние
programs are
готовятся.
held there,
И вот,
including New
как мне
Year programs
кажется, этот кейс,
that
он,
are now being
безусловно,
prepared.
способствует
So I guess that
дальнейшему
this
развитию
case
данной
naturally
территории.
helps
Но
further
мы как бы на
development
этом
of
не
this
остановились,
territory.
то есть
But we did not
автономная
stop
коммерческая
with
организация
that,
«Осельс»,
and
она в настоящее
serious
время
autonomous
начала
non-profit
охватывать и
organization
другие кварталы в городе
has
своим вниманием,
started
и какие-то
engaging
усадебные
other
комплексы в
districts and
области,
quarters
в
in
городце,
the city, and
Павлово,
some manor complexes
Арзамас-Москву,
in
историческое поселение
the Nizhny
федерального
Novgorod
значения.
region, like
Мы
Gorod and
распространяем
Arzamas,
активно
and we are actively
практику
spreading
привлечения
the
волонтеров,
practice of engaging
как в
volunteers,
формате Том Сойер Феста, так и
both
вне
in
этого
the Tom
фестиваля.
Sawyer Fest format and
Очень
beyond this
интересным,
festival.
значит, инвестиционным механизмом,
The
отработанным
very
у нас в регионе,
good
стала
investment tool
реставрация объектов культурного
that we
наследия
have practiced
инвесторами
in our
взамен
region
за предоставление
is
им без торгов под застройку земельного
private
участка.
investment
Хочется сразу отметить, что
in return
речь идет
of
не
a
о
land
земельном
plot
участке рядом с
without
объектом, да,
bidding.
а это
So
земельный
we are not
участок,
talking about
некий,
a
да,
land plot
расположенный
next to
где-то
the
далеко,
cultural
но
heritage site, but a land
в рамках
plot
того,
located
что
somewhere
инвестиционный проект признается
away.
масштабным за
But
счет
as the
осуществления
investment
реставрации,
project is deemed
дал нам возможность
really large scale
предоставления
because of
участка без торгов.
restoration, it enables
Буквально
us
вчера был на
to
объекте,
provide
где
the investors with
завершились
a land
работы,
plot without bidding.
главный дом
And
усадьбы Гусева,
not
как раз
long
таки в квартале
ago,
трех
the
святителей.
work on
Вы знаете,
Gusev Manor
судьба дома
was
сложилась
completed,
настолько
and
интересно, то есть он
the
сначала был
life
признан
of this
аварийным, в
house
2015
was like
году он был
this.
расселен
It was
и с того
first
момента, в общем-то, как,
deemed
ну,
dilapidated,
наверное,
then
можно было
in
на нем ставить крест, если бы не вот этот наш
2015
механизм.
all the residents
Инвестор
were evacuated from
привел
it, and
туда
actually it
тех
could have been
заказчиков,
destroyed
которые
if not
осуществили
our tool,
комплексную
because the
реставрацию,
investor brought
причем
the
настолько деликатную,
customers
настолько
that carried out a
бережную,
comprehensive
что
restoration that
деревянного
was
дома, да,
really
потому что
very sensitive and
к
delicate
деревянному
and
зодчеству
careful,
особый
because
подход,
that
да, то
house
есть там, где
is
были
a
проблемы с
wooden house,
конструктивом, да,
and
там было
we need a
осуществлено
special
протезирование.
approach to
То
wooden
есть в настоящее
architecture,
время
and currently
здание полностью
this
готово
building
к
is
вовлечению в
fully
хозяйственный оборот,
finished
и
and
с учетом
ready
как бы
to
в целом
get
концепции
into the
квартала,
economy. And
я
bearing
думаю,
in mind
что,
the whole concept
безусловно,
of this
там
quarter
будет
district,
осуществлена
I think
некая
that
музейная функция.
a certain museum function would be given
Помимо
to it.
этого, в Нижегородской области в текущем
The
году
Nizhny Novgorod region
был запущен механизм
this year has
субсидирования
launched a
реставрации объектов
subsidizing
культурного
tool
наследия.
in
И
restoring
вот
cultural
буквально
heritage
вчера
sites.
мной было подписано
And
первое
yesterday
соглашение о
I signed
предоставлении
the first
субсидий
agreement on
в счет
granting a
компенсации ранее
subsidy
произведенных затрат на
to
реставрацию
offset
объектов культурного
the
наследия.
previous costs to
Субсидия
restore cultural
предоставляется
heritage
собственникам,
sites, and
физическим и
the
юридическим
subsidy is
лицам,
given to
которые
owners,
владеют
both
объектом
physical
и уже
individuals
вложили
and
средства
legal
в
entities
реставрацию,
that own
как
a
раз таки в
site
целях
and
того,
have
чтобы
invested
частично
into
компенсировать их
restoration.
затраты.
And the subsidy
Так вот,
partly
один из
offsets their costs.
расположенных усадебных
So one
особняков
of
Каменской
Kamenskoye Manors, that is a gem of the upper Volga embankment in Nizhny Novgorod, received the signed agreement on the subsidy yesterday, and they incurred costs in the amount of over 10 million to restore the facade, and up to 70% can be offset. That is the first experience of ours. And budget allocations are made for analogous subsidies for the next year, and I'm sure that this story would be known to a lot of people by word of mouth, and owners that doubt whether to invest or not to invest into restoring the buildings that they own would be able to opt for the first way. And I hope that this would be really useful for further development. And on my behalf, I would like to thank you once again for the invitation, and thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, I would be happy to take them. Thank you very much, Grigory, and we take a close look at what is going on in Nizhny Novgorod. We often go there, and my colleagues often go there, and I have a lot of colleagues there, so there is a lot to learn from Nizhny Novgorod. And when we look at what is going on from the perspective of architects and surveyors and researchers, that gives us sometimes unclear pictures, and it is really important for us to hear your explanations on how you see this management and private business partners engagement, like the tool that you have just talked to us about. So we are really curious to learn what is going on there. I'm not so much aware of the Nizhny Novgorod region, but I know the city very well, and I'm really interested in your development. And after the anniversary, we still have a lot of work to do. Any comments, colleagues? Thank you very much. And we have other speakers. Let us now give the floor to Elizaveta Levicheva, who would tell us something from the field. Elizaveta has already told our participants of the Heritage Forum, who are the students, about the Vinogradovo Manor in the north of Moscow, and now she would share a look with us of an expert who works not from the office but in the field. Yes, thank you very much. Good afternoon. I am from the Department of Orchard and Garden Art, from the Department of Cultural Heritage of Moscow City, and I would like to unravel the topic of manners beyond the cities, rural manners that started belonging to Moscow after Moscow expanded in the early 20th century, and their development vector changed really drastically, because they now belong to the city, and now the development has really changed and increased there. In Moscow territory, I will tell you something about the specificity of my department, and I will tell you about the manners that belong to parks, and over half of these park ensembles are former regional manners. And all ensembles of these former regional manners can globally be split into three large groups. There are museums and museum reserves, parks, culture and recreation, and territories of federal research institutes. And we have ensembles that are privately owned, but mainly they are separate sites, not ensemble sites, but just single ones. And thanks to this split, we can say that in general, manners belong to enlightenment and educational sphere, but in Moscow, these manners found themselves in residential areas, and their parks started implementing recreational functions more for the residents of the districts. Some manners belong to the territory of the whole district. For example, Filikuntseva Manor, Izmailova Manor, Kuzminki Manor. Naturally, they are points of attraction to the residents of these districts, and those manors that are museums and museum reserves also attract a lot of tourists. Therefore, I would name two tasks of the city that are being tackled now, that is territory development, landscaping of these manors, because they are points of attraction of the residents, and these residents are interested in spending their free time, their weekends in their district. And the conditions of access to these manors are also one of the key tasks, because we understand that there are manors that can be accessed freely, but there are also others that are territories of free research institutes where it is hard to get into. For example, Znamensky, Sadki, Cheremushki manors and Timirazyev manor. Well, yes, it is hard to get there too. Thus, now we are trying to address this issue with the help of publishing conditions of access, so that citizens can get at least minimum access. So is it an additional burden? Well, actually, according to the law, citizens have the right to, well, they are entitled, yes, they are entitled to have the access to cultural values, cultural heritage sites. And we use this stipulation, this provision, and we make the owners give access to the residents. So I would like to tell you the way it happens in Moscow, and on a parallel round table devoted to investment. My colleagues have said a lot about ruble per square meter and how investors work and operate in Moscow, but that mainly belongs to urban manors. And if we talk about former regional manors, they are not in that high demand. And I would like to speak about the Vinogradov manor, because it used to belong to the Moscow region for a long time. Moscow region twice tried to propose to investors to work with this manor. First, they tried to do it through Moscow Regional Manors program, and then they tried to sell it per ruble because of the conditions, unsatisfactory conditions. I'm not very well aware of that, but it looks like nobody was interested in it. And it might be connected with the following reason. When we work with manors, we understand that our law is really very stringent, and investors are not very much interested in manors that are located in parks, because we have laws on cultural heritage sites, overlapping natural preservation laws for specially protected natural sites. And when an investor comes to see these sites that they would have to restore, and they fumble at the points of laws, they really get frightened. And they would like to receive a certain return from these sites, which is hard to get. Therefore, there are very few examples of residential manors of this kind in Moscow.
Only in Perky, where it is in the property of Moscow suburbs, it was given to an investor on the program for restoration for the private investor, and to other. One of them is Krokshina is not of interest, and Moscow is trying to include it in its own programs if it is the property of Moscow development of tourist environment, and maybe working with the owners of federal institutes for them to somehow hold some type of works, and some this type of experience we do not have in our department. Like a few investors bought some buildings in one of the territories. Unfortunately, now it's early to judge, but we'll see where it leads to. And in fact, I am happy that the students had an opportunity to work with Vinogradova mansion. When you work with a house which is in the territory of park, you deal with many spheres, both legislation and knowledge. You work with the territory as a whole. And this is the region which, this is a district which has recently been connected to Moscow, where there is no attraction points, so people have to go to different districts to have fun and have their leisure activities. And now it's a big building lot, a big land plot, which can become a driver for the inhabitants of this region and for other visitors and tourists. So former suburb villas is an endless topic. A number of very interesting examples were brought in here. And I did like your examples which are related to the location. So you connect the restoration to the history of the place. You're not trying just to sell a building to people, but you're trying to restore the history of this place. And it's really, really wonderful. I'm very impressed. And from the example of Krasnoyarsk district, I'm also glad. Thank you very much. It was really interesting. It has been really interesting. Thank you, Елизавета. We're all well impressed. But taking a look on the polls, the 10 groups, your observations really correlate to what people say that they grew in Покровска, Стрешнева and other parks, and that's for historic part. They discover it gradually. So the ensemble is not complete, we have to develop it to the full. And there is a very good news that it is developed by the citizens, for the citizens. I think it's really important, of principal importance. Maybe somebody else wants to add something. Any kind of comments, please go ahead, take the mic. Елизавета, as for the park and garden restoration, we understand that park is a multi-layer structure which is many years old. For example, we have the current condition and some objects existed there, some fountains in various periods of time. Currently they are not there or partly destroyed. We are restoring it currently, but what will be the period of time? How will within Moscow we're doing everything all together, or something specific? Yes, that's true. I will try to answer briefly. If the objects are lost completely, we can reconstruct them, but also if there are some archive sources, we have an opportunity that it's written very specifically that it's a special case when there are archive data. And as for the period of time, it's really hard to say. I imagine it the following way. We are looking for the lifetime of the monument, of the monuments, and we consider what information do we have, what is preserved for the moment. And we invite experts, and they express their points of view. A single person cannot say that currently we are restoring. Parks are presented with very complex objects. You come there and everything is covered with grass and bushes and everything. You start to raise some old plants, and if you see, you're trying to clear the territory and restore this historical plan, and this for the period of time. It's the period of time when we have the most information. And after listening to Dmitry Borisovich's report, it's probably important, if we're speaking about the new life of this complex, to have understanding what is the competitive advantage of this place if we create it and not preserve it. If we can select where do we stop, what we can restore. To look to a specific advantage, like Loire, for example, where there are many residents of the royalties. And for garden it's easier. In your question, there is a serious trap, by the way. Restoration is not quite applicable to a park because it's a living organism. We cannot make trees younger if we do not chop them off and build them and plant the new ones. So as a practice, and as a landscape architect practitioner, I dealt with the historic parks. Restoring the park environment, the park area, is for the concept of development of this ensemble. When you understand how it's going to work, how it's going to function, when you see which objects do you need for this functioning, the rest of them should not be restored right away, they can wait. It should be done for a function, what we need today. If we do not take some French park of Morocco at the end of 17th century, parks are not objects, it's a process calculated for decades. When it grows, you have to consider it as process. Yes, please. If we take the objects of cultural heritage, there is an expertise. to find out the main periods, the most valuable aspects. First of all, I understand that, if I understand it correctly, there is an expertise held there, and we have to consider the most valuable moments for these monuments. Do we put the date of preservation of this ensemble structure of a monument? Not always, if it is definable. For example, there are parks, Lefortovo Park. We have a territory of the park of the Catherine's period, and there is the park of Ministry of Defense, which is also a monument of historical heritage. So there is overlapping, and we cannot exclude this moment of being of Ministry of Defense park there, so we preserve both. And Lefortovo is really more complicated. So there is a park of the 50s years, underneath there is a park of the 18th century, and there is archaeology of the beginning of the 18th century. There is also a question. So we have to focus more on what is relevant, or we have to focus on the discovered values during the historical and cultural expertise. I said not for the adjustment of it, but for the use of it. Obviously, the object is adjusted for the use, for the sake of using. If you say that that essence is important, the historical texture, I think the use of it is the key position. But the most efficient economical models which are implemented on such objects are directly connected to the features of the place, of the culture and history. If you do not use it, that's not the economy of historical object, that's the economy of the real estate. Thank you. Let us give the floor to Mr. Bocharnikov, Deputy Head of Protection of the Mansions. Thank you so much. I am glad that we have had such a constructive, informative discussion. I would like to thank the speakers and representatives of Moscow, and I'd like to say that the problem is really hard, because these villas is not only about a monument or type of monument. That's a problem of research. And we have to say right away that what we knew about this literature is the work of enthusiasts, not just experts and researchers, but those who examine that, having special status. And the enthusiasts who examine that and change very often the perception of this monument. So this segment of humanitarian knowledge is an interdisciplinary discipline, because very often you have to double-check, especially in our times, the reliability of the sources, because not all well-known mentions have true story about that. It's related to the complex of approach. That's the issue of attribution. Attribution influences how this will be restored. If we're speaking about the restoration or partial restoration to this or that period of time, where one does not contradict to another, it requires a certain set of iconic, less of the images, and which help to solve methodological issues. What is this park? It has the functional idea and the symbolical part of the park, which dictates its perception, whether you are a visitor or you have excursion there. I want to say that there is such an aspect as working in Bykovo for many years. This is one of the major villas in the Moscow suburbs, which are in very complex conditions because there are many owners. The park is formally in the responsibility of Moscow. The main house is in the Ministry of Healthcare under them, and our Peak Plus, and there is a church at the same time. Some other objects are not privatized, though they are the oldest ones, the greenhouses. And there is a private residential area which has to be replaced by new buildings or resettled. And it's very complex, and it's the most popular way of preservation of a monument, which influences its graduate examination, because, as we know, for example, if this was built in the 20th century, and if it includes some older ones of the 18th century, if this document is stored in the chief archive of the main archive of Moscow, and the owners, it's a complicated thing with the owners. So the researcher has to spend a number of weeks, and in the end, he will give the necessary documents which would help to support this or that scientific theory. I'd like to stress this: a scientific theory, not just some curiosity, but these are the questions which are standing in front of the researcher. And I have to stress that the monuments of villas presuppose interdisciplinary approach. It's, for example, the soil on which agrobiological and economic science is developed. This villa is a center of ownership. It's basically an institute which was owned by the owner. The peasants were taught as people who know how to deal with agriculture, and between the mansion and the city there was a class of peasants, wealthy peasants, who became mercenaries, and we know these historical documents. For them to become richer, wealthier, and the economy of the territories would grow, and such recreations. Many ponds were used for fishing, and these elements are also important. And maybe some parks are old or in bad condition. They are the attractive points for tourists. And if the object is a museum or not a museum, it develops economy because people come there. Small business is developing. Taxi, for example, is used there. That's why we have to consider it as well. Moreover, there is a very interesting trend regarding the villas which are in private ownership, which become private museum, and happily, fortunately, in Moscow suburbs, we have some of these examples, among which I would call the Glinka and Gorenka, which are the examples of transformation of them to the private museum, which is publicly available in the system of Moscow suburbs. I have to say, for Moscow Oblast, these examples are very few, the ones who are in quite a good condition, because there is some wonderful example of Petra Yakovlevsk. Its value is close to Pavlovsk by the level of certain roles, but unfortunately it's in ruins and abandoned partly.
And we can use these examples to see that starting parks, so that is something that I started with, very often changes the interpretation. And there is a very famous researcher that is connected with some Moscow sites, looked at some facts combined in relation to Bykova manor and made a conclusion that this manor was devoted to the deceased spouse of the owner of this manor, and further on it was inherited to his nieces, Vorontsovy Dashkovy. But it turned out that the history of this manor was different, and it turned out that the manor belonged to another niece of his, belonging to the Gagarin's dynasty, and after the death of the uncle, she married a famous governor of the Kursk region and other regions too, Senator Mesayadov, whose son studied in Lyceum together with Pushkin. So she was his mother-in-law. Therefore, dating of some facilities in the manor changes. For example, the rotunda in Bykova could have been built before 1812. So the dating reflected in the papers is subject to doubt. Furthermore, because of this reconsideration and review of sources that influence these dates, another aspect turns up. When we start studying biographies of owners, there is another side to it, and Dmitry Borisovich has mentioned it. That is the quest for a brand, I would say, so something that would attract to the manor. For example, Nikolai Mesayadov for Bykova became a character that hypothetically can be a prototype of the character whom nobody sees but everybody is afraid of in the famous work by Nikolai Gogol, the Inspector General. So there are a lot of things that can change after the research. That is why it is important for historians, the archive workers, artists and archive workers to cooperate more together at the level of higher educational institutions, both at the level of students and professors at the bachelor's and the master's, and it should not be closed within the art history, but the approach to heritage should be as multifaceted as possible, even at the level of studying these or those sites. the expert that has some special status should not be the only person who can work with the site, but while the expert assessment takes place, other authors should be engaged into the process, other authors that research these sites, because they have certain evidence that can streamline the information about this or that manner and streamline the restoration concept. So I am deeply convinced that that has to be done, and that can bridge the gap of the literature that sometimes we do not have, but happily now we do have a lot of papers published. The Русская усадьба Society has been publishing a series of papers that is called the Русская усадьба, Russian manor, that meets all the standards of science. And apart from that, I believe that this mutual dialogue between higher educational institutions, public institutions, private individuals is really of utmost significance. And this range of issues is really critical to understanding how manners can be researched and how a certain foundation can be laid for further research. Boris, thank you very much. Do not think that I would like to offend the office science. I belong to it myself, but to get a fuller assessment, for example, if you have this certificate of expert assessment, not like a restoration project that everybody is looking forward to many years, but you can use this certificate that the conservation site is specified during the work. And you have it, and what does it mean? Does it mean that if we do not break it down, we would work on it, but if we do, then we won't? So it's clear that this paperwork is something that we must have, but if we consider, for example, Vazemsky house, where now there is a Pushkin's museum, there used to be chambers of other nobility, and when they excavated it, they saw other bricks of other color, of other size, and if there were no those diggers, then we would not even have learned about this, and no certificates, no acts, no archives say that. Well, yes, and same is true about Bekova. The story is similar, because when you write something, you do not say that there used to be stone wings that were like flanks to the house. And there is also misinterpretation of the roofs, because some say that it is the roofs of the 18th century, but they are the roofs of the 19th century, and the true envelope of the house is really covered with some other materials. So we should not be afraid of different periodization of parks and manners, because there are elements of orchard and park art that have to be really treated attentively. For example, Tsaritsina has the architectural ensemble of the 18th century, and the park belongs to the early 19th century, and the original planning had to be regular, French, with all of these rays, and same can be found in the ensemble of VDNH that is built on the principle of orchard and park art of Italy and France. But they also had the system of Italian and French layout with a principle of landscaping of the 20th century overlaid on it. Same is true about Lefortovo Park. When you walk along it, you do not visually see that it belongs to different times, but we know that the Soviet tradition of the 1940s and 50s just reproduced the plans of the 18th century using just other trees. In Bykova Park, we also see that according to the plan that they used to have, they just planted a regular parter out of further or later tree species, more like in some resorts, health resorts. Again, there are some trees that are of older varieties, but in their ensemble and preservation nature, they also are of historical, architectural, and agricultural and biological value, because we can show how these trees behave in their growth. So I believe that this synthetic approach is really crucial, and the more attentively we treat cultural heritage sites, the more chances we have to preserve them and to underscore their values. I would like to comment on the preservation site that we write in the expert assessment certificate. It says that it is specified during the historical and architectural research or work. And why we write that? Because restorers always compare the preservation site with the current conditions. Naturally, I will not use a spade to dig something out there to check what is there. So we write it to add something to the site, not to cross anything out. But still, are you afraid that something can be crossed out? Well, when we discover something in progress, then we add it to the paper, because you always have to compare it all with the current conditions to avoid including something that is non-existent. Or we, for example, put the location, indicate the location of something that used to be there with an opportunity to restore it. Thank you. Thank you, dear colleagues. We are really behind our agenda. And I don't think that it is a problem, because it was really very interesting to have this discussion. Thank you for visiting us, thank you for joining us, and I would like to say to our students that we will have a lot of work to do. We just need to study, to learn, and to work. The work will be enough for all. Thank you.
Я ждал этого момента, чтобы рассказать, каким городом я себя ощущаю. Я сохраняю. Сохраняю все важное, что случилось со мной и с моими жителями. Моменты счастья, которые мы проживаем вместе, проносятся сквозь годы и эпохи. Постоянно меняясь, я сохраняю свой исторический облик. Мои прошлые архитектурные творения обретают новую жизнь. Отреставрированные объекты становятся центрами притяжения и открываются новым поколением горожан. Я превращаю давно знакомые сооружения в пространство с уникальным характером и даю людям возможность узнать мою историю. Сохранение историко-культурного наследия – это дело, для которого важен вклад каждого. Вместе мы восстанавливаем памятники, окружаем их почтением и заботой. Заново открываем центры культуры, из которых льется энергия искусства. Возвращаем первозданный облик шедеврам мировой архитектуры. В этом удивительном процессе перерождения я могу по-новому взглянуть на время. Мы не просто движемся в его потоке, мы переносим с собой наши ценности. Мы создаем галерею событий, где встречаются разные поколения москвичей.